Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. My name is Adam Shea, and I'm the chair of SIGGRAPH Online Events, as well as the host of tonight's interview. In partnership with SIGGRAPH's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, we are so excited to host this series, Queer in Gaming, where each month I'll be interviewing a different queer-identifying professional in the games industry to celebrate LGBTQ visibility and voices in the gaming space, and just really have some fun conversations with really cool people. So do note, this is our first session of the series, so please bear with us if there's any technical glitches or difficulties with graphics. It is live, so you will be with us the entire ride. We are working to develop the series as we go, so if you have any comments or feedback, please drop it in the comments through both either Facebook or YouTube. Speaking of commenting, this is the perfect time to read you through SIGGRAPH's online harassment policy and our community guidelines. This slide stream is moderated by ACM SIGGRAPH. We ask that all comments stay respectful of others and respect ACM's policy against harassment. This means to exercise consideration and respect in your speech and actions, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and be mindful of your fellow participants. So lastly, there will be a short Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions during the talk, please drop it in the comments. So to kick us off, I'm so excited to introduce our first guest of the series, Shayna Moon. Shayna started her games career in QA after receiving her bachelor's in digital art and animation design from Ferris State University. Since then, Shayna received her first game credit as the assistant producer of audio through 2018's God of War, was awarded Forbes 30 Under 30 in Games through 2020, and is now full-time at Unity Technologies as a senior technical project manager, where she works closely with game studios on how to improve their experience working in the engine. Shayna, thank you so much for joining.
You are so welcome. I'm really excited to be here.
Gosh, me too. I have been following you on Twitter for quite a long time, and you've been such a huge resource, especially in university. So I have a ton of questions to go through, but we only have an hour, so I'll go quickly. But just to start, how did your interest start in video games and wanting to become a developer?
That's very interesting because for a long time when I was a kid, I had for some reason this separation in my mind between video games and computer games. I can't explain why, but I didn't really have consoles growing up. I was totally PC all the way through college. But I always played games. Like when I was 4 years old, my dad would play NHL '94 with me on his lap. I played a lot of the like Barbie games for girls, played a lot of Star Wars video games. So I always liked games, but I didn't really understand that it was like a job that somebody did until I got to college and I really kind of stopped playing games as much. But I played Plants vs. Zombies and then kind of ran into the series. I saw a video called "So You Want to Be a Game Developer," and at the time I was really struggling in college. Like I had gone in to study economics and really wasn't getting what I wanted to out of that experience. I didn't feel like it really I've always, I've liked to analyze things. I've been interested in business, but I also had this creative side that really wasn't being fulfilled. So I watched this video and it talked about like all these different creative and scientific and interesting things about, being a lifelong learner, always having new technology to integrate into your practice. So I looked into game programs for college. I wasn't even sure if that existed. And I was super lucky to find Ferris State and their great digital animation and game design program. And once I started my first semester there, I knew that making games was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Gosh, that's so awesome to hear. And it's so true to like, it's such an elusive industry, like until you really learn, like, oh, that's a job people do. Like, I don't know, it's just so distant. But it's also really cool that you got to share that connection with your parents as well. Are they really interested in what you do now?
Oh yeah, so my parents are both musicians, and I feel like when I went to them and said, "Hey, mom and dad, I want to go to college for video games," they didn't really have a lot of grounds to like protest because they both went to music school.
Mm.
But no, they've both been super supportive of my career in games, and my mom actually wrote music for games that I worked on in college, and now we've talked a lot about like music and games since I was an audio producer and stuff, and my mom is now like doing game jams as a musician on her own.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's great that she kind of has found this new interest because of like me and what I've been doing, so I
Oh,
really appreciate her.
yeah, that's amazing that like you guys got to take your shared interests and really combine them and find that intersection. That's really
Yeah.
cool. So once you got to school, did you always know you wanted to, or got to game dev school, did you always know you wanted to be a game dev producer?
No, I definitely came into game dev, the game dev program, not being sure. I kind of wanted to be a writer. I think a lot of people come into game development, especially in college, thinking that somehow you can be a person who just like comes in and just like tells everybody what to do, and then your vision gets made. And it actually took me a couple of years to realize that that was not correct. I was really, really fortunate to be nominated to be the president of our game design club at my program. And that was really where I learned just how important teams were and how important working with other people was. To be totally honest, I was not a team player. It was my friends, it was like my good friends in that program who really showed me the value of teamwork and really just like kind of beat me over the head with that lesson that like I could not be a single island. I had to work with other people. And then I was doing an art internship over the summer, and the producer at that studio where I was interning, his name's Mel Danes, and he's been so supportive like my whole college and professional career. He just said to me like, "Hey, have you ever thought of being a producer?" And I said, "I don't know what that is. Please explain." um, and I was going to go to GDC the next spring, and he said, when you go to GDC, you should go to some production talks. So I did. I went to a talk in GDC 2013 called Production 101. It was by Ruth Tamandil. She was working at Monolith at the time, and since I went to that talk, I was like, okay, yes, that's me. That is the thing that I want to do. And everything after that, I wanted to work in more group projects, produce more projects, organize more things, and really tried to steer the rest of my college experience towards that.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think it's also beneficial in a way to like explore the other areas in game dev like before getting to production, just to really see what else is out there and know how to communicate them better. So I feel like in the end, it's a really great learning experience like for everybody involved.
Definitely. I do think that in my personal career it has helped that I did that stuff. I also know producers who are phenomenal who did not do that, like people who came from other industries
Mm.
into games. Um, and I think that like the games industry being more open to people of more kind of diverse backgrounds in terms of their job experience would really help make the industry a more diverse place.
Mm. Yes. And so like you just said, with like producers can really come from anywhere, whether you're you know in other fields or you went to school for it. It really, something that has kind of been a resurgence in the discourse is really about the importance or necessity of a game dev degree. And I'm wondering, you've definitely learned some lessons from it. uh, what would you say are the advantages that it afforded you, or what's some reasoning for why others should consider pursuing a degree, or maybe not pursuing a degree?
So I'm going to caveat this by saying this is all based off of my personal
Mm-hmm.
experience. I think that there is value in doing a game design program in that you are able to work on game projects in kind of a more safe environment. And I think that that environment, if it's a good school, if it's a good program, your instructors and professors should understand that you are going to fail. And I really believe strongly that your ability to, get good grades and like do well in a college program, it shouldn't be based on like being able to make a really flashy, polished game when you're
Mm.
in college, because I personally feel that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be building the skills to work with a team, understanding the disciplines of people in other teams, and that is more important. The learning and especially finishing projects a lot more than making one really big flashy thing. I think that is something that a game program can give you that is really, really valuable.
Mm.
Now, I also understand that a lot of the game programs, especially in the United States, are incredibly expensive. People go tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I question kind of the need for that type of degree. I think that if you are fortunate enough that you are able to spend that kind of money on that kind of degree and you think that it's the right environment for you, you should absolutely go for it. If you're able to get scholarships, if you feel like you can handle the level of responsibility of taking loans to go to one of those programs, you absolutely should do it. But I also think that going to one of those programs, it gives you an advantage when it comes to networking, but I don't necessarily think it makes you a better game developer.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, especially with the advancements, in technology like Twitter and stuff, like there are other avenues to be networking and reaching out to people as well. And yeah, at the end of the day, it really just comes down to each individual person and what they think is best for them. But those are some really great points on things they should be considering. So moving on to uh, your studio experience, pretty early on in your career, you started at Sony Santa Monica, which is such a monolith of a studio and very prestigious. So I'm sure that was like a great experience and a very proud moment for you. Something that I was wondering about is I feel like when people start at those kind of places, really for anybody, it's very easy to kind of have like imposter syndrome, and I think it's even more common maybe if you're in a minority group, especially considering our industry is just so homogenous. And I'm wondering, is that ever something you experienced, or just in general, how can we combat that sort of feeling?
So I would say that at Sony in particular, like my kind of first foray into the AAA inside of the industry was very positive and very supportive. I mean, I feel totally privileged to have gotten to work at Sony Santa Monica while Shannon Studstill was the studio head. I also got to work with Yumi Yang. There are also just like so many incredible women and people of color at Santa Monica studio, people who inspire, people who have taught me things that I never would have learned otherwise. And I feel very fortunate that I was in that kind of environment. Obviously, nowhere is perfect, but yeah, I consider myself incredibly lucky to have landed at that studio at the time when I did, at working with the team that I did. I worked with the narrative team and the audio team while I was at Santa Monica Studio, and you couldn't find a more incredibly talented and hardworking group of people. The narrative animation lead there, Erica Pinto, is just like an absolutely inspiring woman of color in the games industry. And yeah, I mean, the people that I got to work with at Santa Monica are just like forever in my heart. And they really helped me be built into the person and the producer that I am today.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it's so great to hear when studios are doing it right. Like, that just, I don't even know what to say. That's
Oh
really
no.
amazing to hear, and like how much of a learning experience that was. So that's great to hear. What are some ways that they did do it right that maybe we can, even like as a teammate, on a teammate level, like what's something that we can take from how they were doing it and like use at our own studios?
So I'm not going to talk kind of specifically about Santa Monica and the way things work there, just because I'm not an employee there
Mm-hmm.
anymore. But what I will say in terms of like things that I had experienced before I came into that like pretty positive environment, um, I had had the opportunity to work with people who were already pretty experienced in the industry. And there are a lot of those people who really give their time or are paid a lot less than they would kind of in the industry to do teaching in the games education space, in art. Uh, I was extremely fortunate to get to work with Warren Spector, Josh Howard, and David Cohen at the Denny Sam's Game Leadership Academy. They all were incredibly experienced in the industry. Warren Spector is kind of a legend for his work with Disney and on Deus Ex,
Mm-hmm.
and that definitely prepared me for that job at Sony. And a lot of it was just like understanding that people who are really experienced and impressive in the games industry are people, and they want to be treated like normal people, and they just want you to like do your job professionally and be friendly. um, and that was really key for me to just go into a place like Sony where I was working with people who had been in the industry for literal decades and feel comfortable enough to be like, okay, here's what we're going to schedule for this sprint.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And we're gonna touch a bit more on mentorship later, but I think kind of like what you're hinting at now and just, being able to find those people with experience that, really do want to give back and help bring the other people up. So yeah, we'll definitely be getting to that later as well. After God of War shipped, you gave a GDC talk at GDC 2019. Was that always something you had wanted to do?
yes, from the very first GDC that I went to, I knew that eventually I wanted to speak there. And I had actually had earlier opportunities to speak through the GDC volunteer program. I had done kind of their early morning meeting once or twice, and that was in the convention center in front of people in the actual room. So I was like, yes, I'm so close. I also really fortunately was able to participate in Amplifying New Voices, which is a program that runs each year at GDC and is was incredibly valuable for just me understanding how being a person in the games industry works and how to sort of promote myself, how to do public speaking, how to write a bio. The headshot that you all used for this event is a headshot that was taken at an Amplifying New Voices event, so that was tremendously helpful in prepping me for that.
Okay, awesome. And so I do want to plug it. Your talk is called "Shipping Greatness: Practical Lessons from Audio Production on God of War," and I highly want to recommend it to anybody that's interested in production at all. Something that I have a difficult time is just like explaining exactly what a producer does. Like it's so fluid, and is really dependent on the situation. And so just the way you were able to like give a more focused perspective and like putting it in the context of an actual problem that happened and really breaking it down by those steps was just like extremely helpful. And yeah, so it's a great talk. I really suggest everybody check it out. And when looking at like those functions you were talking about, really it does come down to like our job is very much like dynamic problem solving. What are ways that like we can be improving that and improving on those skills other than just like actually working through project or like actually working on a game dev job?
So that's a pretty interesting question. Like becoming a AAA producer, nothing really prepares you for just like what AAA is like from an organizational standpoint. But the way that I prepped for it was I did a lot of game jams. I did game jams while I was in college, and I did game jams in between graduating college and when I went to the Denny Sam's program. I think I did a game jam while I was in Denny Sam's, which was probably not the best choice because I was not did not have free time to do
Mm.
that. But and I think the other part of it, in addition to just like making games, if you want to be somebody who makes games, is understanding kind of emotional intelligence when it comes to being a producer. I mean, really anybody working in the games industry should have those skills. Hopefully, I will say, speaking very personally, I was in recovery for an eating disorder while I was studying game development, and I was part of group therapy and also like one-on-one talk therapy. And I really do think that going through that, kind of learning to really understand my own emotions again, my own feelings about things, and then also kind of hearing from other people their stories, it definitely helped me increase my emotional intelligence skills and taught me a lot of empathy for the people around me. And I think that in games, since we work with so many different types of people, like really learning how to work with people and how to come to people as they are and understand, that everybody is in a different place in their life is really critical. And that prepared me for working in the industry for sure.
Gosh, yeah, and I mean, thank you for sharing that. And it's so true that like a theme that is already emerging that in our talk is just like devs are human, they're people, and
Mhm.
that's the thing that like for anybody working in game development, like you have to know, just like as we're creating, we're dealing with humans, and we're not just it's not just the tech, it's the people involved too. Uh, and to make a good game, you gotta be able to work with those people efficiently. So you were really able to, or something that really impressed me about you is how you were able to take the momentum of the success of God of War and really help you, or really use that to push you forward. Giving the GDC talk, sharing your experiences on Twitter, and really becoming a resource there. And even in your Forbes thread, you kind of talk about how like one of the things you leveraged was the success of the game. How were you able to create these opportunities and navigate through them? Was it like super clear from the beginning?
It wasn't super clear, but the desire to do that, it definitely emerged I was really lucky. Like I did get to like talk to some of the folks who did some of the marketing for God of War and got kind of a look into that side of things.
Mm.
And also through the Amplifying New Voices program, I had access to people who were experienced in that side of the industry. And the March before the game shipped, I did sit down with one of my mentors from Amplifying New Voices and said, how can I do this? What are the best ways to put myself out there in the industry, not just as a developer who worked on X game that was successful. Like there are so many opportunities I've had because that game did so well.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I, Shayna Moon, become a person in the industry who people pay attention to, regardless of where I'm working or what I'm working on? And a lot of it is just about making connections with people. To be honest, some of my best networking opportunities have come from just like talking about how great other people in the industry are and also really celebrating the people that I've worked with. Just being nice to people and coming to it, it's such a bummer. I think the thing that I realized is that networking becomes so much easier once you're actually in the industry, just because you don't have this kind of underlying current of like, oh, I need a job, I need a job, can you get me a job, can you get me a job. Once that has kind of subsided a bit, it makes your conversation so much more personable, so much more
Mm-hmm.
easy. And so me kind of going the next step of like going to do my GDC talk, I went to the West Virginia Game Developer Expo and did their keynote in 2018. That happened because I met two guys who I thought had really cool West Virginia accents and just talked to them at GDC. So it's hard to say like, well, just get a job in AAA and work on a really good game. But I do think that by engaging with people on social media, I mean, especially now since we're all stuck at home, engaging with people in social media like in a really positive way, I can tell you that people generally don't want to network with the person who builds their identity on punching down to people and talking about the games that they hate and the people in the industry that they hate. That's not a good look for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I guess the other side of that is also like not being performatively positive. You know, if I got online and was like, "Oh, this real-time strategy game is like my favorite game. I love all the devs who work on it." It's like I don't play those games generally. Like that would not come across as insincere. It would feel weird.
Mm-hmm.
But I've made a lot of really good connections with writers in the industry. One of my very good friends I met basically because I was like, "Hey, I really liked your work on this game. Like, wow, like tell me more." And again, in a way where I was approaching somebody as a human being and understanding that like they didn't have to engage with me if they didn't want to,
Mm-hmm.
and being okay with the notion that like someone might just not want to talk to me. Like you kind of have to understand that sometimes if you can't make a connection with someone, that's not because there's something wrong with you. It's just you don't know what's happened to them recently in your life, their life. You don't know anything about them. All you know is that you think they're cool, but they don't know you at all. So
Mm-hmm.
just treat people like people, I guess, is my recommendation.
Human decency, what a concept.
Yeah, I definitely remember at my first couple of GECs that we were all just kind of in a race to like see like the most impressive business cards we could get. And like I think back on that now and I'm just like that was so unimportant. And
Yeah.
the I guess if I could say anything to students now, it's that the people that you are going to school with and the people you're in classes with are your best network. Like make those friendships. Do not step on other people because they are the people who can be advocates for you and they are the people who you can advocate for.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think, especially being like a young dev, overthinking it is like a big challenge of like you talked about being the performative. And it's really, yeah, better to focus on the genuine. It is just that mental block though of like trying to not make it transactional. Like, how do I, talk to people without being like, oh, give me a job, or like to make sure you're not doing that is like so important. Like,
And I
you're,
think
Yeah.
It's also okay to like practice that. Like I've definitely met people in the industry where I was like, "Oh my god, be cool, be cool, be cool. Just like don't freak out, just be chill."
Hmm.
And that's like making the effort to be chill around people that you're excited to meet. Like that is not, there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh,
Like
for sure.
practicing being polite and kind of coming to people as a human is like a good thing to practice for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like that never goes away either. There's always somebody that's like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I'm near them. Or I feel like that way at work all the time. Like, oh my gosh, look at that person who just walked in. So yeah, that's definitely something that's going to go throughout your whole career, I'm sure. So uh, we can't avoid it. I do think we need to talk about our current work situation. We've all been home for the pandemic. Every studio has been working from home for quite a while. I think our work from home anniversary is in like 2 weeks, so that's exciting. But so my question is, you really talk. One of the things you talked about in your GDC talk is about advocating for the team and being that person. But now with how like just drastically different the work environment is, how has that changed? And really, how are you adapting to still be that advocate?
So I remember in what we now, I believe, call the before times, having a conversation with my good friend Mike Hamilton, absolutely phenomenal producer, still at Santa Monica. We were just talking about like production and how remote production like felt like it would be a nightmare. And I think that in a lot of ways it is. I started at Unity remotely, working remotely, and so I have not met anyone who I work with in person. And that, especially for me being in this project manager role where my job is communication, it's tremendously difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I can't pretend that like it was really, it was not easy to adjust to that. I also am somebody who generally talks with my hands a lot, and I completely lost the ability to do that. I have in particular, and I don't, and maybe you've experienced this as well, I have a hard time distinguishing people's voices from each other when they are all coming through the computer. They sound like more homogenous to me. And so at the beginning, I found myself having a lot of issues remembering who I had talked to about what. So I had to make adjustments in the way that I work. And one of those things was just kind of changing the way that I take notes. I take notes with a lot more context now about who was talking and what they were saying and who they were directing what they were saying to. That has just been a coping strategy to deal with like my particular difficulties when it comes to kind of the emotional stuff and the connections, because I still really need to do that. And I genuinely care about everybody that I'm interacting with on a day-to-day basis, and want them to be having the best experience possible. And if there's any way that I can help, I want to do that. And the ways that I would communicate that when I was like in the same room with them, I mean, there's so much nonverbal communication that happens. It's a lot easier to kind of convey to somebody that you care about them just by your body language. And now what I do is I have to say a lot more things out loud than I would before when I was in person with people. Like I have to say out loud sometimes, like, "Hey, it seemed like you were a little bit uncomfortable with the task that we talked about, or it seems like you were not 100% on board with the strategy that we're about to employ. Like, can you tell me kind of where your head is at about that?" And that feels incredibly difficult, and it feels very like weird and invasive at times. I do think that the people that I work with appreciate, though, that I have kind of taken those steps to put myself out there and be more vulnerable in the way that I'm communicating, and that helps other people feel comfortable being a little bit more vulnerable with me, when we're talking about just like how things are going with what they're doing. I think that it is going to change the way that we work for a very, it is changing us just as people. Like I feel changed as a person as a result of all of this. And my hope is that the future that we see as a result of all of these kind of tech companies and other companies going work from home is that we end up with an industry and just a general work culture that is more understanding of people's needs. a lot of this remote work, a lot of the tech that we've stood up to be able to do work this way is something that people with physical disabilities have been asking for a long time. And the physical location of an office has been something that has prevented people from being able to go and work at the companies they would like to. I would like the industry to keep all of these remote jobs. I would like those students that I talk to in West Virginia to be able to apply to studios on the West Coast and be seriously considered, because there is nothing about those students that makes them less desirable or inferior to people who are already in California, except for where they happen to be born. And we should have an industry that accommodates that, because we're missing out on people. We're missing out on tons of people and perspectives that we could have now that we don't.
That's so incredibly true about the talent and accessibility, and especially with like how fast game dev moves, like it really limited to who is in a city, because just like at least how from my experience, they're really just like, oh, we need someone in 2 weeks, we're only going to look at who's nearby. And yeah, like exactly, we've proven that it's not necessary. Like we can work remotely and we can do all these things, and the tech is there and does work. So yeah, it's such a good point, and we'll see, I guess, what ends up happening. But we definitely should continue to like keep these things available so we do hear more of those voices. And I do really love what you said about like taking the first step to be more vulnerable, and help other people try to do that as well. We were talking about like emotional intelligence, like so many things we used to have to pick up that was unsaid, and now that we're all behind a computer screen, like that's just not possible anymore. So yeah, we really do have to be more explicit and direct with our needs and making sure that others are as well, so that we can help them. Um, so looking at I mean, speaking still of accessibility in a little bit of a different light, one of the ways that we're hearing more voices is by making the tools more accessible, and Unity is such a great example of that, along with, Unreal and Blender. As these tools continue to be more accessible, where do you see game development heading?
The thing that I'm really excited and optimistic about is kind of this surge of co op studios that have been cropping up in recent years. I think that a future of games that is a bright one is one where the people working at studios are empowered and have control over their own fates. I think that it is a model that I really hope that the industry pays attention to and sort of doesn't discount if like a couple of them go wrong. Like, I think that the current cycles that we have in the industry where people are taken advantage of, people go through just absolutely heinous crunch. I mean, the according to like the GEC state of the industry survey a couple of years ago, the average length of a career in games is like 4 to 5 years. And I think that the reason why that is so short is because so many people just absolutely burn out, are not able to sustain a career, are not, frankly, not paid enough in this industry to be able to have a life. And I really want there to be a future where workers have equity in the companies that they work for, beyond sort of the standard like, well, you own stock and that means that you have control over things. Like, that is like technically true, but when you have like billionaire shareholders invested in a company, like your pithy amount of stock as an employee is not really significant enough for you to change things.
Mm-hmm.
So the co-op stuff I'm really encouraged by. I'm also excited about games that we are starting to see from developing countries. um, I think that our industry has been so like Western centric for so long, and I really hope that advancements in technology and the fact that like our world is getting more and more connected than ever before means that we will see perspectives outside of like kind of the quote unquote default like white American perspective that has been very dominant in games for many years. I want to see games from Cuba. I want to see games from Chinese developers. A thing that I'm really excited is to see there are all these studios in Southeast Asia, in other parts of Asia, other parts of the world where they have been outsource houses for the AAA games industry for many, many years.
Mhm.
And that means that there's a workforce over there that understands how to make these like super high quality assets for games. And I would love to see those folks kind of have their own studios and make their own games and show their perspective and how incredibly rich and valuable that is. Not in terms of like, we can make a lot of profit off of it, but that we can progress games as an artistic medium once it is not just coming from, the point of view of like half a dozen or a dozen people's perspectives.
For sure. Yeah, and like with that westernization, like it's kind of cyclical that like when you have all the billionaire investors, like we just see how it keeps trending to yeah, it is just about making money. So the more we can break away from that and democratize, like we can go back to like creating the art form. So yeah, the co-op studios is actually really new to me. I only like learned what those are like a month ago. So it's really cool to see how many are like already cropping up everywhere. Um, I mean, speaking of like of these indie development studios and how they're bringing more voices to games, I guess this doesn't have to be about indie games, but are there any games that you've seen recently that you're just really impressed with the amount of representation in, or ones that really have stuck out with you?
So it's rough because I have definitely been on like a glut of like big AAA games because that's just like been my tastes have been lately. Um, Trying to think of them, I think that there was that really phenomenal game that I unfortunately cannot remember the name of, that involved like a pretty overt theme of like anti-colonialism and kind of fighting back against a colonialist power. It was the one where you had the bird and was like a lot with like interacting with the bird. It was a VR title, but that I was fortunately able to play not in VR. Um, There's also a game called Ravi that drew really heavily on Indian mythology and culture. Um, of course, Hindu mythology is not all, it's not all homogenous, but this had kind of that distinct aesthetic. In terms of like gender and sexuality, I played through Tell Me Why, and there was like a lot of kind of dialogue about like, hey, AAA company, like this is not the first video game with a trans main character.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of slapped this arbitrary thing on it because it has a high poly count. Um, but I thought Tell Me Why, particularly in the sense of like its representation, it absolutely gave me a new perspective on the transgender experience. I think like in particular like trans masculine people and trans men have been a bit underrepresented,
Mm-hmm.
um, just generally in media. And so just Tyler's story, and kind of the way that he felt alienated from his family because of his gender, um, it resonated with me as a queer person, and it also just like gave me the opportunity to understand more about what my transgender friends have gone through.
Mm. Yeah, and I think a nice thing about like yes, it definitely was not the first game, but at least having a bigger audience or platform definitely like got us to open up the discourse more and then to even bring in the conversation like, hey, this isn't the first one. Like, look at all these other
Right.
games that might have been doing it before. So yeah, it definitely is nice to see like even the smaller indie studios like pushing the bigger ones to start to be more inclusive and keep growing that conversation.
And I do think that unfortunately, as queer people, as we have grown up and as games have like kind of grown up as a medium, we have definitely gotten used to eating scraps. I think that, a lot of us, when we talk about, you know, I mean, I don't want to name any projects in particular, but there's a lot of games, they have queer representation, or they had things that could kind of be interpreted as queer, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I know that I hold a lot of those IPs and series in my heart, but I think now it is not enough anymore. Like
Mm-hmm.
we cannot merely accept that level of queer representation in media. One thing in particular that always kind of bothers me is that games are very unwilling to use the word bisexual just generally. There's always kind of this like mystique when it comes to characters that are interested in men and women or just more than one gender generally. It's like you can use the word bisexual. Like that's a word. It's not a dirty word. I know it has the word sexual in it, but like come on now. That's a thing that people are.
Mm-hmm.
So just use the word. Like it's fine.
For
So
sure. Yeah, and
that's like a
even
personal thing with me.
yeah. No, I totally understand that. I mean, especially with the conversation about like holding them to higher standards. Things just like it doesn't have to be about tragedy all the time, and just like, or even them having a queer identity doesn't have to be the topic.
Hmm.
I loved Night in the Woods, how like the two gay characters, like it just like sometimes come up in random conversation, but it's not about that or about them. So like we can tell stories and have those characters, and like uh, we don't have to like show horse it either at the same time. So yeah, I mean, holding people accountable and to those standards is important to keep growing the industry.
Yeah, and really like when it comes to I think that a lot of folks can get kind of sensitive when it comes to criticism from the queer community, especially when it's coming from queer people of color. Like I definitely think that those voices tend to get discounted a lot just like
Mm-hmm.
because of endemic racism in culture, Western culture generally. Um, but I just lost my train of thought. That's fine. What was the last point that you made?
um,
Sorry.
I think just holding them to more standards, and holding them accountable. And I think to what you're saying about the voices too, it's important that if we're trying to show that work that we're making, not to like as the creators, not to take it harshly. I guess like if they're being critical, don't like then shut in and be like, okay, well now I won't even try it. Like I think it's important to
Yeah,
take
that
criticism.
that's def that's definitely a sentiment that I've heard. It's like, we want to do a little bit of representation, but you're asking us to do like a lot, and that's uncomfy for us, and we feel like we're going to get criticized by, the other folks out there on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in conversation with folks in the industry about that, and what I say to them is, hey, guess what? You're doing a little bit of representation and you're going to get the exact same comments from hateful people that you will if you just make like the most like rainbow colored game you possibly
Mm-hmm.
can. Just as queer people, as any kind of marginalized person, your inclusion in the industry or a piece of media is inherently political. And it does not matter if you show up a little bit or if you show up a lot. The same hateful people are going to be hateful regardless. So you might as well go for it and have a point of view and do the right thing and show us as we are
Mm-hmm.
rather than being timid. Because at the end of the day, real queer people are really impacted by queer representation in media. That is 100% true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, especially in the entertainment industry, people should feel obligated to show diverse voices and show diverse characters. It is not acceptable anymore to have these homogenous casts of characters. It's just not anymore. We're not going to accept it. We are, the queer population, and really not the queer population, but the percentage of queer people who are comfortable being out and using their voices is increasing with every generation. We are important and our voices should be heard. Period.
Well said. No, definitely.
I think about this a lot.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel that as well. And like I love the conversation of just like, oh, why are there more queer people? And it's like, it's not that there's more, it's just like it's easier to come out more like when you see the representation in media, like as we can normalize it more. We have to
Yeah,
keep pushing that boundary. But yeah, no, I think well said.
thanks. It I think one thing that I would say to the folks who are cisgender, are heterosexual, like I understand that when your friends come out of the closet and start like expressing their sexuality, expressing their real gender identity, like it can seem like, oh my gosh, like all of a sudden this person, everything they want to talk about is about being gay or being trans or some combination of the two. you don't know what it's like
Hmm.
to have to hide this huge part of yourself for years. I mean, I was not fully out until I was like 25. That's a long time to just deny a huge part of your identity. And so yeah, like now that I'm like out, like yeah, I want to do an interview about how I'm queer and how I make video games. Like hello, hi, I'm here and I'm great at this and other queer developers are also great at this and we're here and we're not going away.
Right. I love that. And that visibility is just so important because yeah, I totally relate to that as well as just like until like it takes a second to click and it's just hard to get there until like you see your people and like realize like, oh yeah, this is legitimate and it's normal and it's real. And so yeah, I mean, thank you for, being you and being visible and like I love seeing like people in their Twitter bios, just like just showing, whatever, just like even the little, just like any sort of visibility really helps, and like just know like they're there, like I could be there too. Um, so I'm gonna shift it a little bit more. We're talking about, or we talked a lot about, making the representation in games more diverse, and of course that also comes from making the devs, like the dev community, be more diverse as well. And a big part you've played in that is mentorship. So we've touched on it a little bit, but I was hoping you could just speak a bit more about the different mentorship programs you've been a part of and just what they've meant to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's strange. Like, as I have volunteered for things and done things, it never feels like, oh, I'm like accruing all of these things. And then you kind of look back and you're like, oh, I have done this a lot. Weird. I just, once I was in AAA, I realized that there were so many pieces of information that were not widely available just about what the experience was like, or even just the experience of being like a professional producer. Like, generally in the games industry, when it comes to events like GDC, studios do not send their associate or assistant level developers. They send their seniors, and then those seniors go to these conferences and they talk to each other. Maybe they do a talk, but they're not really accessible. And so, one of the first major events that I did, I was really fortunate. I got accepted into the GDC volunteer program. And as soon as I was a part of that program, I wanted to give back to it because it was such a phenomenal experience. So the second year that I did it, I looked at people's resumes. I think they asked me to do like mock interviews, and I was like, "Buddy, I have been working in this job for a year and you want me to pretend to interview people? Okay, I guess I'll just do that." And so that was really valuable. The GDC volunteers are such a great group. I I also just have been fortunate. Like when I see an opportunity to help other people, I just like jump on it. Another program that I have done, well, so I got into and participated in Amplifying New Voices, also a GDC event, and did it the first year, learned so much, got so much out of it. And so the next year I sent a message to one of the organizers and I was like, "Hey, can I help out with this?" And she was like, "We'll keep you in mind." And I just bugged her for months. And then finally, I think it was like a few days to like a week before the conference, she was like, "Oh, hey, could you be the starting speaker for our event today on Sunday?" And I was like, "Absolutely, yes, I can." And it's that kind of like, you know, you could say it's a little bit reckless, kind of taking risks, like, but I was excited because like I definitely like thought I had things that I could share. At least if I could share like one little thing, that would be really great. And in that opening talk for Amplifying New Voices, I mentioned that I was queer and that I was in the games industry and that I thought that queer people and people of color and people of marginalized genders, like I said, your voices are important. I really believe that. And any opportunity that I have to share that with people, I want to say that because I think that, we just don't hear it enough. And so the latest program that I was involved in, actually last February I was in Las Vegas for Dice, and I think about that sometimes and just kind of want to go take a shower. because it's just so many people,
Yeah.
really weird to think about. But the Megan, who used to run GDC, and who runs Amplifying New Voices, is now the president of the organization that puts on Dice. And she happened to post like, "Hey, we're looking for volunteers for this mentorship program." And again, I said, "Oh, heck yeah! Oh, yes, I will fly to Las Vegas." Of course, a place I've never been to and am frankly a little bit scared of. um, and so I jumped on that, and I had my mentee Danielle. She's an artist, and I just basically spent 2 days kind of being her companion for the conference, answering questions, introducing her to people, sort of awkwardly forcing her into conversations so that she could meet people. And it was such a great, like, doing that. The one-on-one mentorship is incredibly rewarding. Like, I when someone that you've mentored succeeds in some way, or like when someone that I've talked to, because I really love Twitter for this, which it just like allows me to have like quick and easy conversation with people who are interested in game development, or specifically production. And I do just reach out to people and say, "Hey, I'll look at your resume for you." And sometimes like a year or like 2 years later, they come back and they message me and say, "Hey, I just got a job at this place." And I say, "Great." And it feels amazing. Not
Hmm.
that I think that I should have all the credit for their success, because that's not true. They did the work themselves. But it's just the most amazing feeling. And it frankly feels better than even my own like personal successes. Because I feel the joy of having, encourage someone and help someone do this thing that I really love, that I want to share.
Yeah, completely agree. It's such like we're such a collaborative industry that just like anything we can do to bring someone up as well, it's just like it's a win for the team. It's a win for the industry. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a great experience, and it's really cool to hear you doing all of that. Sorry, we are running at 5 minutes left, so I did just want to get to a few of the questions.
Hit me.
Yeah, so sorry, let's see here. So Shadow Carmelian on YouTube wrote, since I'm a bi person myself, and given this is about LGBTQ people in the industry, have you personally faced any conflicts due to your sexuality, or has it not really been a problem?
Not when it comes to sexuality. I've actually met a ton of really cool queer people in the industry. I definitely think that, at least like where I'm at, like I live and work in Los Angeles. I feel very safe as an out queer person.
Mm-hmm.
I try to use that safety to really like be an advocate for other people, because I've have and have had like transgender coworkers who like don't always get treated the way they should be, and I try to like use the fact that I feel very secure as a queer person to kind of stand up for them.
Mm-hmm.
um, I will say that the thing that I have actually personally experienced is, as a woman, I have definitely had some rough experiences. I did another Twitter thread about how I walked out of an interview because of some sexist comments, and I have also experienced some anti-Semitic comments that I had to then kind of go to my HR person and get them to deal with. So,
Mm-hmm.
at least not when it comes to me being bi, I have not personally experienced that. Not yet, at least.
And hopefully never, right? I mean, it is an onus is really on allyship too, right? Like how you just said about the trans friends as well. Like if we see it happening, we need to be the ones to step in there as well. Like no matter who you are, and really make sure we're holding other people accountable as well. Um, so Milena Lukic on Facebook wrote, do you feel you have learned more being in the industry versus being in school? Did you feel prepared after graduating before diving into the industry?
I don't think that I could have gone immediately from my undergraduate degree into the role that I had at Sony. I think that having experience in QA was really, really vital. I think that if your technical skills are not quite there, but you still really want to be part of the industry, and you like the idea of doing QA and you are passionate about like finding all the bugs in a game and then writing up a really detailed report about what that bug is, I think that I wish that every game developer had a year of QA experience because QA is so vital.
Mhm.
I also think that the leadership program that I did was really essential. That program unfortunately does not exist anymore in the form that it did when I was in it. Um, but just me personally, no, I don't necessarily. I mean, I guess it did prepare me for my QA job. So technically, yes, it did prepare me. But I needed more practical experience making games before I was ready to actually be like a professional producer.
Gotcha. Um, so one more question from our audience. Have you had to deal with crunch during production? If so, how have you handled it, or how's your team handled it?
So yes, I have certainly worked some long hours. Again, not like going to go into like super specific details. I think that one thing that we can do in the industry to prevent crunch is really kind of stop this culture that we have in school of people working themselves to death. I think that that definitely primes students when they come into the industry to be very exploitable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I do think, and this was a point that I made kind of during my GDC talk, I think that when you're in a position of leadership, when you're in a position of production, part of your job should be to prevent crunch. Um, I think that projects that end up having a lot of crunch, um, you know, it's always kind of hard to pinpoint where that exactly came from, but I do think that it represents a failure to plan correctly. Um, Not that bad developers crunch or that good games don't come out of studios that crunch. That's obviously not true, but I couldn't be the person who talks so much about emotional intelligence and caring about people and say like, yeah, crunch is absolutely necessary and game developers love to crunch. Like, I think that narrative is absurd, frankly. Like, I firmly believe in the philosophy that when people say, "Oh, we couldn't make them stop working," like, no, that's not true. They are your employee. You can tell them to go home.
Mm-hmm.
That is not an acceptable excuse to me.
Yeah, and I mean that's really just another example of like bad management, honestly. Like as someone in charge, you really need to know how to set boundaries for both yourself and the people under you, and really push for that. And I think if anything, to really celebrate the studios that do it correctly and have their successes, I think is really important as well. To at least try to get the studios that think it's necessary to get away from it. But yeah, it's still an issue.
The adage that has been going around lately is I want smaller games made by less people who are paid more that look worse. And I agree with that,
Mm-hmm.
especially the paying people more part.
Yes, yes, most certainly. And I mean, we talked about retention, like treating your employees well. That's how we keep people here, and that experience, like economically, even like it makes sense to hold people around.
There
So
there are people working in the AAA industry today on games that do very well critically who are struggling each month to make rent.
mm-hmm.
And I think that that is wrong. I think that that's exploitive and we it shouldn't be something that we accept at all.
Absolutely. So we are past 7 o'clock. So thank you so much for talking with us. It was a great conversation and really great to have you. Before I let you go, is there anything that you wanted to plug or last minute thoughts you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, please, like the best way to get in contact with me is on Twitter. Even if you like just want to say hi or just say thank you for the talk, that kind of thing. I That is the easiest way to get in contact with me, frankly. And I really it's so tough in something like this because I'm looking at a computer screen. I'm frankly been watching myself this whole time. Um, but I want this industry to be better for the people who are coming into it, and I want there to be more diverse voices. And I am personally committed to that goal of making the industry better for everybody. And I can tell you that if you feel like you don't belong here, you do. And there are people in this industry who want you to come, and we will support you. And I certainly am not the only person who feels that way. I have been mentored by people who felt that way, and I would not have the career and the opportunities that I have had without people who came up before me who really sincerely cared. And I desperately want to pass that on to the other people in the industry coming in.
That's wonderful. And yes, and I mean, we've seen it. Your Twitter is such a great resource. I really recommend everybody be following you. And could you remind us what that Twitter handle is?
Yes, it is inscrutable. It is it is QORQUIQ on Twitter. If you just search my name, you can also find me on LinkedIn. If you want to go to my personal website, it's shaynamoon.com, or my absolute favorite thing, you can go to themooniS.gay, and that will also take you to my personal website. I love that joke. It was worth every penny for the URL.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for speaking with us. And yeah, I hope you have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody who took some time to watch me get up on my soapbox.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all to everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you had a good time. Like I said, we're really open to feedback on how we can improve this series. And if you know with anybody you think would be good to have on, that you think really represents good representation in the gaming community, we'd love to hear that as well. So you can either drop a comment or message us on Facebook, or we are at SIGGRAPH on Twitter. And we hope you join us for the next event. We'll be dropping that very shortly for our speaker in March. So until then,